Good evening. Welcome to Out of Many, a conversation series featuring our National Academicians participating in E Pluribus, Out of Many, curated by Dr. Kelli Morgan. I'm Adrienne Elise-Tarver, the Director of Programs here at the National Academy of Design. For those of you joining us virtually, we have dropped the show link in the chat function. So if you haven't had a chance to browse it, please do so. For those of you joining us in person, the show is outofmany.nationalacademy.org, so please visit at your leisure. This exhibition is based on the premise of, this exhibition was created during a waning pandemic amongst social upheaval and political turmoil. It features 101 artists and architects as different as they are interesting. The show asks the question, what new futures can be created if Americans stop pursuing the ideal of national unity and accept our reality as an incongruent collective? Tonight, we're joining you live from the National Arts Club here in New York City. I'm joined by our architect, Marlon Blackwell, our National Academician, who is joined by our Chief Curator, Sara Reisman, in conversation. During the conversation, you can drop your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom webinar screen. And for those of us live here at the National Arts Club, you can raise your hand at the end when we have our Q&A. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Sara Reisman. Sara is the Chief Curator and Director of National Academician Affairs here at the National Academy. She's a curator, educator, and writer. Reisman has curated exhibitions locally and internationally for venues including Hugh Lane Dublin City Gallery, Futura Center for Contemporary Art in Prague, the Queen's Museum of Art, Socrates Sculpture Park, the Cooper Union School of Art, the Philadelphia Institute of Contemporary Art, Momenta Art, and Smack Mellon, among other venues. She has been awarded residencies at Art MI, the Foundation for Civil Society, Artis, CEC ArtsLink, Futura, and the Montella Foundation. Reisman has also taught art history and contemporary art at the University of Pennsylvania, SUNY Purchase School of Art and Design, and since 2016 at the School of Visual Arts Curatorial Practice Master's Program. She received her BA from the University of Chicago and was the 2002 to 2003 Helena Rubinstein Fellow at the Whitney Museum Independent Study Program. Thank you for joining us, Sara.
Thanks, Adrienne. It's great to be here in person at the National Arts Club with a small group for this conversation with architect Marlon Blackwell, whose work, Coat of Many Colors, is on view as part of the National Academy's digital annual E Pluribus, Out of Many, curated by Dr. Kelli Morgan, which we'll probably say a few more times. Before I introduce Marlon, I want to thank Adrienne Tarver and Angelique Owens, our programs team, for making this event happen. It's now my pleasure to introduce Marlon. Marlon Blackwell, FAIA, is a practicing architect based in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and the E. Fay Jones Distinguished Professor at the University of Arkansas. Blackwell is the recipient of the 2020 AIA Gold Medal, a 2019 Resident Fellow at the American Academy in Rome, and a 2014 United States Artist Ford Fellow. Work produced in his professional office, Marlon Blackwell Architects, MBA, has received significant recognition, including the 2016 Cooper Hewitt National Design Award in Architecture, a monograph of Blackwell's early work, An Architecture of the Ozarks. The Works of Marlon Blackwell was published in 2005, and a new monograph titled Radical Practice, which we'll talk about at the end, will be published in 2022. So welcome, Marlon. Thank you for being here. Maybe you can join me on the stage. So I have many, many questions for you, but we've agreed to focus on 6 projects. And for those who are in the architecture field, you know that's just a slice. So it's going to be 6 projects and 6 questions. I'll pose a question as you're presenting each project. Maybe there'll be a few more. Before we dig in, I wanted to frame the conversation within the National Academy's annual, which features your work in a room titled Through Human Eyes, that curator Dr. Kelli Morgan used to orient the viewer with these questions. And I'm not necessarily asking you to answer these questions, I'll repurpose them. What is the human experience? And how does our quest for purpose align with concepts of unity and national identity? So if we shift the focus of these questions a bit towards your role as an architect, I wanted to ask you before we get started, what aspects of the human experience are most motivating and compelling to your practice? We didn't really talk about this.
Heavy stuff, yeah, no, that's true. I think pretty much, I think how one engages the everyday. Mm-hmm. So how you embrace the world as it's given to you, without being consumed by it. So that's constant negotiation. So so how people engage the everyday, how architecture animates that and elevates it and dignifies it, the experience of the everyday, I think is something that really is important to us, where the prosaic and the honorific, come together or not, and so our whole position is that architecture should be experienced by everyone, that architecture can happen anywhere, at any scale, at any budget, and for anyone. Every project deserves to be architecture, especially in places where you least expect to find it. So that experience of discovery and wonder, but also in kind of recognizing what's strangely familiar, like something that's of your place but not quite, kind of, we believe offers the opportunity to interrupt the habitual way people see the world and give pause and help them join us in the question of how might it be otherwise. And that's the way in which we offer alternative models for what reality can be.
So how might it be otherwise is a good maybe starting point for your transformations, right?
The transformation stories, that we feel like we're involved in. Just real quickly. So we're always looking at that intersection of nature made and culture made, and we like to call them abstract unions that come together. Little character from Pocahontas, Arkansas. But we like I said, we work in Fayetteville, Arkansas, about a block from the square. We all like to describe our practice as about being in the place, of the place, and for the place. I do the practice with my partner and wife, Ati Blackwell, and 28 others, and we're doing work, everything from free health clinics to embassies in Africa that we're currently working on. So quite a range of work that's both local and global. The transformation story is something where we're always thinking about what we're given, what we already have, and how do we repurpose that? How do we represent it in some ways? And so this is a story of William J. Fulbright, the senator who became Senator Fulbright, the Fulbright scholarships, was from Fayetteville, Arkansas, and his family owned a mill that made farm implements out of local white oak. And post-war, they began to develop or build up an inventory because the demand had gone down. And, they made wagon wheels and plowshares, axe handles, things of that nature. And he had a childhood friend who was an architect, a very famous architect from Fayetteville, who was designing the first fine arts complex in the country on a university campus. And his name was Edward Durrell Stone, who you may know here in New York. And anyways, he went to his friend Ed and said, you're a creative person. What could we do with all these implements? What do you think? And he said, well, give me a little time. And so he actually came back in a couple of weeks and said, I have this great idea. Why don't we make a whole line of furniture that we can populate this new fine arts complex with, and then also sell as well. So wagon wheels became stools. Here we go. Wagon wheels became stools. Got it? Okay. Here you see plow handles became these wonderful chairs. Big plowshares, along with the traditional Ozark craft of basket weaving, made these beautiful chase lounges. And so they really provided the future, or the past, I should say, with the future in terms of repurposing these tools. That's how we think about how we engage the places, no matter where we're working at. And the beauty of it is it's not just impact locally, but this is actually the Cooper Hewitt Design Museum. You can go there today, and here they are. So they have impact, significance beyond their place. That's the transformation story we believe we're involved in. And as we say here, the new develops out of the old, but the old, however, is, red alight in the new. So they sort of mix together. And I think it's a powerful thing.
And it's relevant to the National Academy of Design, which we're calling a 200-year-old startup. Or as we approach the 200th anniversary in 2025.
Yeah, it's always, the old is always changed in the light of the new in many ways. And they become of each other in some ways.
So do you want to go to the first project, the Mary
I
Grove?
think a good example of this is, it's a great story. It's the Mary Grove Early Education Center in Detroit, Michigan. And course, there's a whole revitalization going on in Detroit. In 6 Mile in Detroit, a whole college campus has basically shut down. The Mary Grove College, traditional African-American liberal arts college, through attrition, declining enrollment, financial issues, came to a stop, undergraduate and graduate. And so the Kresge Foundation stepped in and decided they would repurpose this collegiate Gothic campus, beautiful campus in a traditional and historic African-American neighborhood. And so they're basically turning this campus into what we call cradle to career, from prenatal all the way to 20 years. So the moment you're born, you become part of an education system. You get education early, which is really critical to strengthening communities, and as well, all the way to careers that set folks forward to go further in college or into the workplace. And so the cornerstone of this is this early childhood learning center that we were fortunately able to do. And this is a one-story building on the edge of the campus, a mat building. Had to be one story because it just handles, infants all the way to kindergarten. Mm-hmm. But we developed it with a series of courtyards to bring light in the middle, control places for play and such, and something that had to resonate with the existing campus. And also have its own identity here, because it is of the 21st century. It's not trying to look like a building of the 20th century that was trying to look like a building of the 19th century, which was trying to look like a building of the 15th century. I mean, we have evolved. So, and it was really critical to the community. We had a lot of input for how the facility should work and the transparency of the institution. But one of the requests we got from not only the community, but also those at the Kresge was something that was representative of the individual in the community, but also the diversity of that too. I like the word that was used, the incongruent collective, you know, and it is basically one and many. So what would the building, how would it represent itself? And normally, you know, we would put out a copper building or a brick building or something, and we were told, no, it has to be polychromatic, and it has to be of a material that 50 years from now would still feel like new. And so we came to the conclusion of terracotta, multi-colored terracotta rain screen panels, glazed panels, and it really becomes, in many ways, like what we'd like to call a coat of many colors. And it kind of starts to deal with that tension between individual and community identities as well, but has a sense of being a kind of fuzzy from afar, but really the identities of the colors come into focus as you get closer. Wendy Jackson, who sort of leading the charge here with Kresge, you know, said, "Look, we're like polychroma," and I would say, "Well, it reminds me of, you're talking like about quilts," and I said, "Reminds me of the ladies from Gee's Bend, Alabama." And I said, "Have you been?" She goes, "I have." I said, "Well, so have I." So we immediately had this shared experience of culture that, you know, means something in Alabama, but it also means something in Detroit, right? Of this patchwork of a quilt, which is essentially what we were making, that, you know, of relatively discarded cloths that's stitched together to make a beautiful work of art that's at once useful, right, and beautiful. And so that was the inspiration. And you can begin to see how the building comes together in the way in which it's articulated and demonstrates multiple ways of how this code can work and how things are lit. I recently just showed the picture of a building to Miss Petway, who's the matriarch, Gee's Bend. I was there in June, and I was telling her how much her quilts inspired this building. She looked at the building and said, "You just gave me an idea for a quilt." so we're kind of reciprocating here a little bit. But this, you know, light is captured from above, from the side, you know, from the front, and you can see how it relates to the Gothic. And so as you move in, and it's animated with all these courtyards, really places for play, places for fellowship, places for solitude and reflection for the children as well as the staff. So it's a great learning environment that where every room, as you see the folding of the room, has a different character to it. And I thought it was really important. Every classroom has natural light, has a connection with nature, which is a big part of the educational experience here.
The question I have about this is with the kind of cladding of the building and the patchwork and this kind of relationship to quilting, I sort of wanted to just ask you, I mean, it has an aesthetic read, right? It works well as a photograph in an exhibition.
Sure.
And then it also kind of conjures the quilt, to somebody who's really involved in that. But it actually, the project comes out of a study that was funded by the Kresge Foundation, based on a need in Detroit in a certain community for what you call cradle to career.
Cradle to career.
Cradle to career support and education and resources. And so I'm curious for you as an architect, how you synthesize data, because to think about a study that would prompt a project, I mean, I imagine it came to you, you came to it at a point where the data was sort of resolved, like we're doing this, but how do you...
all the research into childcare providers. Yeah, there's a whole network there in Detroit. And there was some concern that this would, this has all the resources where others have few, but it really has become more of an operations center and a resource itself. There was a lot of outreach to the existing childcare providers in the community to bring them on board, so they actually have access to all the sort of teaching methods and programs that are going on here. There are also community rooms here for the neighbors and for folks to have meetings and so forth. So it really becomes a community center in the way that many schools do, right? So that was, I think, really important. And I think, we also have the University of Michigan involved. The Starfish, there's a big child care provider. And, they're all interested in this early childhood education. So that everything from the size of classrooms to, the way in which they're articulated and that sort of thing is all research-based, right? So it's something that didn't just sort of fall out of the air, although it did fall out of our head a little bit, in terms of how would it be expressed, without being patronizing in some ways to kids, as a lot of kids stuff is, everything's a rainbow or something, but at the same time, something that would be, kind of tough on the outside and soft on the inside, and that was kind of how we thought about this. The coat of many colors is an armored coat of many colors.
Should we go to the next project?
Sure.
Go ahead. So, well, you should start because I have some questions, but.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, when we talk about transformation, we're talking this transformation of a campus, this contributing to the revitalization, these pockets of revitalization in Detroit that are, really education being the sort of backbone of the community into success. And that's something that Detroit suffered from. In Memphis, there's another transformation of a landscape that we were involved in that really helped us with Detroit in many ways. But it's the Shelby Farms Park. It's the largest urban park in America. It's 4,500 acres. It's a park that we did with James Corner. I'm sure you know the High Line here. Wonderful to work with. They had been working on the project for a few years before we were brought in. This is a park that had been operating since the 70s through a nonprofit, but had difficulty sustaining itself, wasn't reflective of the socioeconomic diversity of Memphis. And they really began to rethink how they could develop the heart of the park. Didn't have much of an identity. What sort of identity could it have? How would you generate revenue? How do you make it feel more welcome? How do you program activities? That sort of thing. And so this was a kind of negotiation between us, the park, and the corner about how we developed the heart of the park. But, this is the bridge from Arkansas into Memphis, crossing the river. The park is on the other side of Memphis, in East Memphis, and it used to be a penal farm. From the 20s all the way up to the 70s, prisoners worked this land, developed crops. They had the blue ribbon cattle and so forth, and to feed themselves and to work, and then they would sell off what they didn't have, what they had left over to the community or to the county. In the 70s, that's no longer an appropriate rehabilitation method, so it was turned over to the county, and then the county, and you can see how this was sort of working. The county didn't know what to do with it. It's so large, how to maintain it. Developers started coming in. We want to turn it into, some kind of big tract development, and that's where the nonprofit emerged. The citizens rose up. They said, no, we want to return this back to nature and really have a park of our own, complement Overton Park, which is in the downtown park in Memphis.
What I find interesting about this is the history of the site. Like, how does that shape you're thinking about your approach. And I think like here in New York, there are discussions about, shutting down Rikers Island, and in the kind of in the kind of long term, the question would be what would happen to that site, and would it ever be kind of resolved or kind of a positive space, right? So I guess it's a question, just is that attractive to you to think about what might be perceived as a negative history of a site or complicated?
Well, I mean, the way in which we work, I mean, we're often working with these histories, low culture, high culture. We don't see those as negatives. We see those as in a kind of inclusive way of being inspired, and creating. So often our mission or task isn't to resolve one to the other, but to develop resonance between these conditions that allow them to, be present, but, allow for progress to go on. So in this case, we developed 7 buildings: a visitor center, a restaurant retreat center, there was a boat kiosk, shade pavilions or picnic pavilions, a stage pavilion, all of these different deal. And we noticed wherever we're in the park, wherever there's shade, there's people. No shade, no people. So we're in a pasture around a lake that's been enlarged. How do you generate your own shade? So we developed a whole family of figures around a language of porches. And these figures, recall the agricultural figures that sat on the open, horizon in this agricultural landscape, traditional landscape, and also shared a reduced palette of form, but also materials. And so we start with the vernacular. We always like to start with origins, which is a good place to start, not necessarily the end, but we learn from simple ways of creating breezes, of shading. And so our first structure is an 8,000 square foot visitor center with an 8,000 square foot porch. It's got a 32-foot cantilever. We took just aluminum bar grate that's used all the time in the agricultural business, and we turned it into a cladding system, figured out how to connect it to big trusses, second growth cypress, a local renewable resource there, and made this whole kind of vocabulary. These breezeways, you enter into the landscape, and the porch, and within we cool the shade, because in the South you could be in the shade and still sweat.
Yeah.
So we cool the shade with 5 big ass fans, 20-foot big ass fans, which is the manufacturing name. It's not mine. But that's the now they can program this space as well as the interior. So the yoga, receptions, a host of things can happen. So each of these porches generate their own revenue, and that was a really important thing. And you begin to see how the light plays with this simple material. So there's a material culture that's born out of the tools and the farm implements, and then of course there's the agriculture that it's referencing as well. And you begin to see how it really begins to meld with the landscape. I think it's a great combination, us and Corner working together. Again, these picnic pavilions we call the crickets. These are booked out 3 months ahead. They use them for family reunions a lot. It's really great revenue generator. Boat kiosks, all the canoes and kayaks and concessions are here. Looks like something crawled up out of the lake here. But again, the same reduced palette. These really economical structures. I mean, we had to build this for really low budgets. Stage pavilions for events on the lake and on the lawn. Shade pavilion when it's not being used. But you can begin to see how the figures relate. And then the restaurant retreat center, which has great for conferences and weddings. But we were working at the time with Kimball Musk, Elon Musk's brother, who had farm-to-table restaurants, his first ground up. And what identifies this as an 80-foot deep porch, more people sitting outside than inside, and this beautiful connection with the lake beyond. So it's been a huge hit there. The diversity of the folks that come here now is really reflective of the city. They're in the black for the first time. They've been open for 5 years, since it's been repurposed. It's a good time, and it's used both day and night, and as you can see here. So it's a good success story in this transformation of a landscape that had pretty tortured history.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to belabor it, but is there resistance to that or opposition? I mean, I think of, have a background
Yeah.
in public art, I think of like Fresh Kills being a site that people are worried about, the remediation, what that would, once it's restored to some kind of usable function, how would that, people are worried about the risk, right?
So the
they're,
environmental risk.
yeah, or
and
they're
that
just,
sort of
I
thing.
just think of different sites that will be transformed, have been transformed, and how long that can take, and
Yeah.
done.
Yeah, it
Sounds like
interesting.
not.
No, not
Yeah,
so much
yeah.
because, again, these are landscapes that have suffered
Right.
both culturally and environmentally, and they offer to contribute to an atmosphere of hope that you have to have, I think, in order to make progress in places that are often depressed, and so, what do? You don't just do anything. I think folks have enough presence of mind to say, wow, 4,500 acres of tract homes might not be the best use of this land.
Right.
So they already, when they transitioned from the penal farm, the community had already set its own trajectory in this
Right.
particular case. They said, we don't want that, we'd rather have a park. The question is, what kind of park? And that took 30, 40 years, 50 years really, nearly, to figure out.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a long process.
It's a long process, right?
Right. And that's probably a lot of voices, but it sounds like to good results.
Right. You don't produce a landscape. A landscape is only achieved over time. It evolves, and this is part of that evolution.
Should we look at the ledger? Or, sorry, Gentry Public Library.
Library starts with an
Yeah.
L. That's,
Yeah. No, we're having.
Well, this is a
Yeah.
this is a little library. I love one of our favorite projects in buildings because it is such a great story of a little town in Gentry, Arkansas, 2,500 people at the time, who wanted their own public library. They had bought a 100-year-old mercantile building on the corner of Main Street for $1. Basically, it was abandoned, and they wanted to have a library and a community center. They could have put it out on the edge of the highway, made a metal building, but they just didn't want that. They wanted identity, and this is what we were given. It was essentially a ruin. We thought they ought to tear it down and start over, and we were told that actually there was a lot of sentimentality relative to this building. It was a socioeconomic hub of the city for nearly 100 years. So what to do. They wanted a new identity, but they didn't want a pastiche of history either, like a Disneyland. So trying to figure out what to do with a building that, as you can see, has been hit in storms and patched together with brick. And after we got familiar with it a little bit, we realized we really appreciated the ticks and wrinkles that had been achieved over time, the expressive character. So we decided, I decided after a couple of weeks, it's my first public building, so I really had to get it right. So it was a lot of pressure, a lot of drawing, a little bit of bourbon, cigars, to kind of figure this out. But we decided not to do anything, actually, which was to leave it alone, let it be an artifact, don't even replace the windows, don't just pull it out, and develop a series of details, as you can see here, of windows like vitrines, so forth, that would really begin to turn the institution inside out. These are like called soap bubble details here. That windows, doors, columns, all that creates a new vocabulary to give a new identity and presence. And this is the least expensive public library built today in the state of Arkansas. It's $110 a square foot, contemporary library. It's also the first winner of the National AIA Library Award for the state of Arkansas. And beautiful details that we were able to put together with structural glazing, beautiful interface between the street and the reading room. The press tin ceiling was taken down by county prisoners, restored off-site. So they wanted to preserve that as part of their history. We replaced all the columns, wrapped the columns in books and glass, and then uplet that so we don't have to disturb the ceiling. Gives ambient light to the reading rooms. Just capturing light boxes in the existing openings to capture the light and pull it in and create, again, a secular moment to, in a kind of almost a spiritual experience that's happening. But that, I think, is really, really critical. And the great success here is that when we finished this project, when we started, there were 300 library card holders in the town of 2,500. When we finished and it opened, there was 2,300 library card holders. So it underscores the power, I think, of architecture to strengthen institutions.
One of the things that this brings up for me is an observation I have from travel or even just being here in New York City, the way in which like historic architecture, even if it doesn't have like a social function, think of like the Flatiron District and these historic buildings and the way that they're preserved and represent another era of kind of production value that is very, very different than today. But I wonder if you have any thoughts about the importance of preservation in that in the context of, I mean, in a way, was this a library before?
No, it was
No. Yeah.
basically it was a hardware store. So
Okay.
they sold buggies up
Yes.
on the second
Yeah.
floor, and they would bring them down on Arkansas's first mechanical lift, hook the buggies up to horses on the street. So we actually took the I don't know what the formatting's doing this, but next time PowerPoint, trust me, not PDFs. That's
Agreed.
not
Yeah.
a design format.
Yeah.
Sorry, but nonetheless, after I beat up on our technicians here, we have the old mechanical lift became an exhibit. They have a genealogy department. So the history is also a series of exhibits on the inside that they can show. And I think that's what repurposing is about. It's representing the world as it's given to you.
Right.
And I think that we talk about sustainability. I think that's probably one of the most sustainable things you can do if you want to truly minimize your carbon footprint. Take what you already have. And I think in this particular case, it's really became a true center for the community. And it's 14 years later, still is even more loved
Right.
than it was initially, and well taken care of.
So it's an example of architecture, like the relic of the previous architecture adding value to the
Yes.
experience of the site.
Yes.
I mean, we're here in the National Arts Club, which was Samuel Tilden's house.
Mhm.
And I guess, well, our offices are upstairs temporarily. But I guess I'm wondering how you think of historic buildings in cities and towns, large and small, what role they play, and if there's any kind of intersection with the conversation about monuments at this moment. I guess because certain buildings have certain histories, right?
Right. Right. Well, those histories are evolving. I mean, they're different, in my opinion, from a statue in the center of a square.
Right.
Right. That was put there to remind people who's really in power. That's very different, in my opinion.
It is different.
The architecture evolves over time. And if you don't believe it, go to Rome. And half of those buildings were palazzos for the wealthy. Today, they might be a school.
Right.
They might be a foundation. They might be a store that sells paper.
Right.
But it's the fabric of the city, and it's what
Right.
gives the city its identity.
Right.
So if you tear it down, what do you replace it with? And then you're under the obligation, I argue, to replace it with something as useful or better. And I would argue that doesn't happen as much as it should. So we
I would
have
agree. Yeah.
an entire urban renewal across this country in the 60s. It was about tearing down buildings like this in communities, disrupting communities, whatever their history was, whether one part of society saw it as positive or negative, but erasing and doing the tabula rasa. I think we live on constructed sites. There's politics, there's social constructs, there's a host of things that we have to deal with. That's what makes it rich.
Yeah. Thanks for that answer. I thought maybe we weren't. Yeah.
What?
No, it's
No,
good.
no,
It's
I
okay.
mean, I would,
Yeah.
or it has to be evaluated. I mean,
Right.
and in some cases, like, you just tear it down
Right.
and you start again. But you really have to consider it deeply, and especially in our times. I think.
And there is value in living with your history, like contending with your history, right? If it's
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you erase history. I mean, history is not about facts. It's cultural truths, and those truths evolve over
Right.
time. I mean, there is facts. Excuse me, I don't
Yeah.
want to work either. No facts, right? Fact free.
I understood.
No, but you understood what I mean.
understand,
Yeah, it's not just something happened on this date, but there
Right.
are cultural truths.
Right.
And
and they do evolve.
and who are the authorities?
Right.
And that often becomes the truth, right? For that time. And when that changes, the truth evolves.
So we could go to the next
Sure.
project.
Oh.
This is the ledger. This project excites me because because of the function, but I'll let you. It's
Well,
Yeah.
we are doing a variety of buildings. This is a building that is a collaboration with Michel Rochkin, Mexican architect, and noted Mexican architect, I might add, well known, and his team at WeWork. He was head of architecture at WeWork at the time. This was going to be their first ground-up building in Bentonville, Arkansas, a 200,000 square foot office building. And Bentonville it sees itself as the capital of mountain biking in the country. And there's a lot of truth to that, how it's evolving with bike trails. Biking culture is a big part of this town and big part of the attraction. Well, we all know what happened to WeWork.
We do.
Sort of imploded, and they were going to be the single tenant. So they withdrew, and so we. It's really a collaboration with Michelle and his team, but Callahan and Hirochi firm, Michelle, MBA.
Mm-hmm.
But to the point of that, the little foregrounding of that, the challenge was how do we make a building, right, that could engage this culture of biking and this notion of public space. You have the town square, but in most small towns, that's about all the public space you get. You don't get a lot of pocket parks and all of that. But parks, they have a whole, what they call quilt of parks through the town, and Greenway, the Razorback Greenway is nationally known. So we thought about how we could extend that and let it become the articulation of the building. So this is a building where you can bike to your fifth floor office, so it's or walk. So we take the actual public space, extend it diagonally up. It also, because it by moving diagonally back and forth, it scales the building away from the street edge. And then these ramps deposit you on cantilevered public terraces overlooking the town square, which is about 3 blocks away. So it's really quite lovely in a way as an idea. We also have Stefan Sagmeister is going to be developing all the graphics for the ramp, and I won't say anything more about it other than Ozark critters and jewels. I'll leave it at that. But he's done something pretty special there. So this building is under construction, and what's cool is it sets up some really dynamic vertical surface, but it also activates the inside. So you're on the inside, and there are streets,
Right.
moving back and forth and across like a street, motion. So the whole idea of activity and motion and getting outside and back inside, really there's a synchronicity and a resonance there that I think will be pretty powerful once the project's complete. And this is it about a month ago, and they're now installing the glass, and all of the ramps are copper, and then as they get to the cantilevered terraces, they become planters, and so they'll have plants and stuff overflowing and stuff. It'll be quite nice, and a really nice intersection with nature and recreation as well as work.
Well, this, more than some of the other projects we've looked at, is really directly addresses like the idea that architecture can change habits and behavior by kind of incentivizing use of bikes within.
Right.
I mean, but it sounds like it's a big bike city in any case. Or,
It is.
Yeah.
It's something, and this helps expand that.
Right.
Again, back to the question, how might it be otherwise?
Right.
The other thing I think that's really powerful about it is that rather than solve all the urbanism and solve all the development issues by maximizing the footprint and just extruding it up, this is a way of giving back too, because you're engaging the public, you're providing public space as part of the value proposition. So this is happening more and more. I think the new younger developers now are a lot smarter and a lot more savvy about how they leverage public space, how they leverage emptiness to kind of begin to generate economies or collateral economies around them.
So I wonder, what I was thinking about is the scale of this building and bikes being kind of feeding into it.
And through it as well.
Yeah,
You
through it.
go through it and then up. You wrap
Where do they
around.
park?
Bike
Wherever,
racks,
okay.
and there's all kinds of It's all in, it's part of the infrastructure.
Yeah. But I guess what I'm fascinated by here is that historically ecological practices like recycling or not using a car but biking, like these are kind of decisions made on the individual level. Especially in this country, there's not historically been much incentive towards eco habits and practices. And so, yeah, I just think it's interesting to think about how you as an architect or as part of a team can actually really shift the way that people use space and think about the way they get around. I mean, I'm a recent biking devotee, so.
Well,
I'm
I think
excited
it
about
extends
this,
that out. That isn't to say it doesn't have a parking garage, but the
Right.
parking garage is designed that it can be converted because the prediction is that there will be less cars
Right.
or different types of cars and so forth. So how would you convert some of the floors of a parking garage into retail or into other civic
Other
types
uses,
of programs? Yeah.
So that my question was, what's been the response? But it sounds like it's positive at least.
So far,
yeah.
I mean, I think people are still like, well, what's going on? You know, it's because it could have easily been a very banal glass building that would have looked more at home
Right.
on, in the suburbs, that you get along the highway. This really engages with the local culture in a very specific way, and I think fixes it to its place. Speaking of fixing it to its place, and this idea of public-private, we're doing this fun project here, and you might have had a question about this before I begin, or?
No,
No?
go
Okay.
ahead, yeah.
This is PS 1200 in Fort Worth, Texas. We're working with a young developer and his father, who I met in Detroit, who basically, there is so much emptiness in Detroit, he can take a space. He works with Julie Bartman, who just won the Oberlander Prize, which is like the Pritzker for landscape. She uses a backhoe, no drawings hardly, and just digs up the site, and whatever the history they find, that's what they make for the plazas. And then they develop businesses around in the existing buildings and generates a local economy. It's really amazing what he's done, this Philip Kafka in Detroit. So he wanted to try it in Fort Worth in an emerging neighborhood on Magnolia and 6th here, about 2 miles from the Kimball Art Museum. And he wanted to use his favorite building system, this prosaic system of Quonset huts. And everybody's seen Quonset huts on the side of the road, and they're pretty humble structures. So what we thought we could do is ennoble the prosaic in a kind of honorific way. And a series of, this is a mixed use, so those 8 huts that you see are 20 foot wide. They're 3 stories. Top 2 stories are living dwelling units. Below are offices that can be combined. And then we took the hut, the Quonset system, and flipped it on its side, developed cladding systems for this local vegan restaurant that you see in the upper left, and a little grab and go, and a little art gallery, and then in between a public plaza. And it's all a vocabulary, a sort of kit of parts that really sets up a value proposition here for the neighborhood, and but also is being done rather economically. As you can see here, this is just the system, and this is Philip's development in Detroit called True North. It was one of the finalists for the Mies Prize just a couple of years ago. And then, of course, that structure that we all love, that we are paying homage to in our own way, and trying to, again, ennoble. And just the idea that you repeat that in a kind of organized and provide a form to its character, I think is pretty powerful. And it is under construction and will be completed in March, February. We're really excited. I just got photos today. I didn't want to share them, but they just started erecting the huts today. So very exciting.
That's very exciting. Can you talk a little bit more about the public-private intersection here?
Sure.
Is it a public space that's been partially privatized, or private space that's being made public?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's a private space that's been made public. So
Okay.
again, rather than eat up the entire perimeter, there is a pocket park right here for the neighborhood and for those that enjoy eating or the grab and go. You just want to grab something and go. But then in between, there's like an alley, another type of park there. So, and then they push all the parking to the back. They even bought sites, and they're developing them as parks where you can park in, so that it's really becomes a walkable kind of development. And the idea is always to kind of peel off and give something back. And that also creates benefits to the tenants and to the people who live here.
So we're actually at the question and answer portion. I've just noticed I've got a prompt for that. But I'm going to ask a question and then
Yeah.
and
And then
it's-
lead into the last project.
Yeah, well, I think what's interesting with a lot of your work, and there's another project we didn't look at, which is the Whole Health Institute, which is connected. It's in Bentonville, right, and it's connected to the Crystal Bridges Museum. So it's a site where kind of art and wellness come together.
That's right.
And so there's a through line in a lot of the work that we've looked at today that's philanthropic in some way. And I guess I wanted to ask you a two-part question about how you found yourself there, like what motivates you in that direction. Maybe it's an obvious question to ask, but also thinking about architects and artists and cultural producers, how to kind of, if you have advice about locating this kind of work, activating it. I know it's a big question, but
that's a big one. Like, in other words, philanthropists that are building, is that what you mean?
Well, it seems like you've managed to kind of collaborate or be working in response to some of these initiatives, which is fabulous. But I think is there a first kind of project that you did that had this kind of undertone or underpinning in terms of public good versus houses, or which are good too?
Well, houses are good, and I think that's the way, the traditional way when you're not necessarily independent wealthy or whatever, you begin a business, an architecture firm or studios, you do residential houses and you develop a language and a discourse around that. We did that. I just got to the point where, it's hard to make a living doing that, but also where I was at, I felt like the cities and the communities needed more than a single family house, that I really wanted to get into institutions. Many of the building typologies where I live, like schools and hospitals and healthcare, I think from an architectural standpoint are impoverished. They don't contribute to the fundamental civic dignity of our communities. They are basically ersatz and pretty transactional. So we wanted to take some of those typologies on. So we got involved with schools, getting involved with healthcare. We did a free health clinic that's probably for $69 a square foot, where we use remnants and so forth. It's probably one of the nicest medical healthcare spaces in Northwest Arkansas. I mean, so this idea that it costs more is bullshit. So, and I tell the profession that all the time. I hate hearing architects talk about, if I only had more money. No, if it's a good idea, it should be able to be realized at multiple price points. We don't go in there trying to make money on those. We don't want to lose money, but we believe that, as I said earlier, architecture should be able to happen anywhere. And these are worthy projects to take on. So that is what got us noticed in a way, is that we could be resourceful in how we worked and elevate. There's a small church, many of us know, there was a welding shed, and just smaller project. We're still doing those. We want to be involved in our communities. We want to contribute. It isn't about, I want to kind of expand and become, and then I do, my museum in Barcelona or whatever. I mean, those are things are nice, but we're in Arkansas, and we're doing an embassy in Africa. That's great, but I'm still looking for projects locally, if they'll have me. From the philanthropy side, I think there is a desire from the philanthropists I've engaged for design excellence. They see design as something that is really can address present day issues and problems. They see design as a way of enriching quality of life, the quality of the environment. So they're willing to invest in that. We've had to compete for all the things. Nobody just comes and gives you anything. That's the way the world works.
Right.
But we've been fortunate, and we've had advocates in Detroit, for example. Maurice Cox, who was the head of Detroit planning, now head of Chicago, was a big advocate for us. Give us a chance, Someone like Alice Walton, who's very invested, in the community and really thinking about things like health, not the treatment, but the prevention of health and well-being and spirit and mind, and the role of art in that. how does that manifest itself as an institution or as an architectural reality, a tangible reality? These are the questions she's asking, and then she needs help. So she invites us in. So I think if the philanthropy is for good, that's great, you know.
Yeah.
But we stay. I'm to be honest with you, and I don't mean it as an offense to any developers. We typically
Avoid
really
that.
qualify working with developers. Although we're working with Tishman Speyer right now, and we're working with Philip Kafka, who's Prince Concepts is a great developer. But
But you're selective.
that we're selective as they are
Right.
too. I'm just not interested in being somebody's pencil. So I really see it as a collaboration, and if you qualify, that's great. And I really kind of want to move it beyond the transactional. So where the philanthropy makes sense is when they put purpose before profit. And I think that that is a mantle that we as a profession have to take on too. You know, if we do that, I think we will succeed, and we will increase our relevance tenfold in society. But as long as we try to remain as a kind of transactional type of entity that's about just maximizing profit
Right.
for whatever, then we'll never take on a project like a free health clinic.
Right.
You see where I'm going?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. I
So,
understand.
it's a long-winded answer to a very simple question.
It's a good.
But
It makes sense.
it's a good question because you have to qualify, you know, with a lot of things. But what good will it do? And that's the question we're always asking.
So we can see if the audience has questions
Yeah.
for Marlon, and I see Leslie Wayne has a question.
So when you work on a proposal for a public project, like the library or the park,
Yeah.
how much do you engage with the community in actually realizing your vision? Like, do you have to go to community boards? Do you talk with the people?
Right. Yeah, yes, we do talk. I don't know, people imagine these are formalized charrettes and all of that. I'm always skeptical of that, these sort of boilerplate responses to, we're all going to get in a room and make architecture. No, you're not.
Thank you.
You know, and I honestly, from an architectural standpoint, I'm not interested in somebody telling me how to be an architect. They'll draw something. How about this? No. You know, what I'm interested is tell me your story. I want to hear their stories. I want to hear what folks, why they're in the community in the first place. I don't need a laundry list of needs. I want to hear, why are you here? What's your story? And when I hear that, I hear the optimism. I hear the reasons they're here, not there. And I want to tap into that. And then whatever we're doing is one way to make where they're at better. And so we do listen very carefully, but we act boldly. And so there's only so much you can take in before you
Right.
have to respond.
Right.
But sometimes the system is more formalized. I've actually, quite frankly, sometimes these entities that we work with will conduct their own community engagement because they want to control it, you know, and then they will bring you the information. But you still have to interface with the community leaders. I think that's critical.
So we have a question from one of our colleagues, Amanda Shields, who's tuning in from, is it Delaware, I think? And she asks, how does climate change affect your process? Do you find incorporating sustainable materials challenging?
I don't, you know, we try to work local. So with the local workforce, the local materials, you know, the woods that we use are usually locally sourced in some way. We are always thinking about orientation, shade. We try to think like farmers do, you know. They say the vernacular is what you do when you can't get it wrong. You know, I can't afford to get it wrong. A good friend that came up with that, Brian K. Lyons. But it's important. We're always thinking about that. And we're also always thinking about how do we integrate these new active systems in a sort of stealth way. So for like Shelby Farms, for example, it's all passively cooled, a lot of it, but you know, there's only so much you can do. So we have geothermal lines in the lake that help heat and cool, all integrated. You would never know it. We don't, the sustainability thing It's just something that's, we believe should be highly integrated. But like if I see a cistern attached to a building, that celebrate, we're just not into that.
Right.
I mean, it has to be integrated. So it's not, we don't want to beat our chest that we're somehow sensitive to the environment. Of course we are. That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
But I also say this too, it doesn't matter how many LEED certifications you have or net zero are, if it's a crappy building, nobody cares. And trust me, it'll be one of those first buildings that'll come down when the times change, right? They're not going to care how environment sustainable. It has to be good architecture. And I want to keep reminding people of that. That's why the integration is so important.
So another question about the Ledger building is, what will its purpose be now that it's not WeWork? I mean, is it?
It's still a co-office
Right.
kind of scenario. There's ironically, a big bike company, that's all I'm going to say, is locating on the ground floor.
Nice.
It's one of its, I think it's sales and R&D. So I won't mention the name of it because I don't know that I can, but so that's an example. But there are a host of everything from annexes to schools to businesses and so forth that are moving in. And because it is so variable, the types of sizes that you can get, and the interiors right now are being developed by Callahan and Ritchie here in New York. So I'm really excited to see how that's going to come along. But I think it will be a very robust. There'll be vendors as well for for Walmart. I could imagine healthcare also being there. So just whatever you find in the community, I think will gravitate there in some ways. If you're willing to ride a bike or walk up, if you're not on the ground floor, walk up.
So last question is from
Yeah.
an anonymous attendee who asks, what advice would you offer to emerging architects looking to make a positive impact in their communities through design?
Learn your craft.
Yeah.
Learn the language of your discipline. And so it's an ongoing deal, and just commit yourself to building well. And what I mean by that is, dealing with the sustainable or the social, the environmental, and the economical. Learn how to be resourceful, and people appreciate that. Use and beauty can go hand in hand. I think it's really important. So that's what I recommend. I remember my mentor Faye Jones and also another good friend and mentor, Glenn Murkett. I asked him how was your work so consistently good from the time you began to they're in their Faye's passed, but Glenn is now 85. They both answered the same way. Said, you start your firm the way you want to end it. You don't wake up at 50 and decide you're going to do good work. So you have to start that way. It's tough, and it'll be discouraging at times, but find ways to survive whatever so that you set the terms for doing the best work possible, and really learn your craft, because that's an ongoing thing. Don't know the language of your own discipline. I don't know how you do it.
So I'm not sure if I'm reading this right.
Yeah.
We have time for one more question from the audience, if there is one. I had so many questions at the beginning, but I feel like
you
you've...
stunned into silence.
No. Yeah,
So,
Greg, yeah.
Your example of the Gentry Library and the increase in
Readership. Yeah.
Readership.
library cards and
Yeah.
is a really powerful example of social engagement and getting a community involved. And we often talk a lot about architecture's possibility for fostering civic life and public life.
Yes.
And as an agent of social change, I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about that and more about you personally and your role in that process and how you approach it.
Well, my role is to design these things as a kind of framework for it to happen, right? And so I have to. It takes I think you have to generate in yourself a certain kind of empathy for the place and who you're working with, and really put yourself where they're at and how do I connect, and what could happen here. So I think that's how I look at it. I don't, I grew up in the Air Force family and traveling around. So the idea of a citizen of one community was very foreign to me, you know. And I really stayed in, one of the reasons I stayed in Arkansas for nearly 30 years is to learn to become a citizen and a contributing member of my community and raising my kids there and such. So, you know, try to find ways to give back as well, you know, everything from scholarships to sponsoring lectures and things of that nature. But in terms of the public realm, you know, I think just trying to make good buildings is about all I can do. Absolutely. But I don't know. I love interacting with the stakeholders and the users that we're working with, and again, hearing their stories and then responding. And we've had really good luck in connecting with them. And I think it's because we're not afraid to be bold, but we really listen very carefully to what they do and try to be mindful and good stewards of their resources.
So there's another online question.
Okay.
Just they keep flying in, and it's, so how can I be like you with a gold medal one day without being in a big city? I mean, I think it's framed in a way that I think it actually is worth addressing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. You know,
Actually, I think it's from somebody who's related to you. Do you see this? Mariotti Blackwell.
that's my wife. Oh, goodness. That's my partner.
Okay. All right. There we go.
She's being funny.
Yeah.
That's what she is. No, I always tell her every once in a while a blind dog finds a bone. So the great thing is, and what's happening, I think, in organizations like the National Academy of Design, the American Academy of Arts and Letters, the host of other organizations that have historically been, you know, fairly in the margins, I like to call it, on the edges, and are now turning their eyes towards the middle. I think that I feel like there is really becoming a deeper appreciation for what is happening both in art, in music, always in music, of course, but in architecture and so forth. And the recognitions are coming, and there are accolades because there is good work. And I think institutions are changing the way they need to diversify too. And there's diversity is also geographical. And so I think the key is to make a real contribution to your place, but not just make it about being local. It goes back to the transformation story. How do I have not just a local impact? How do I have an impact globally or nationally? You know, how do I have that kind of presence? What is it that I do that would be important to somebody else that doesn't live here but lives in their own place? How do I generate models that could be useful elsewhere? And so I think that would be the way to do it, and then do it consistently and stay in a place. Don't keep moving around. I think you do that for the first maybe 5-10 years, then you got to stay put. And most really great architects who achieve a lot, you know them for a place, and I think that's
Right.
that's a real key.
So it's about committing to place and then also transcending place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what I call the productive tension between the local and the global, and of course we all know that as the global. But that's that's what you have to produce.
I think that's a wrap in terms of questions. Do we want to announce anything for next week? Or
Thank you.
yeah. Hi, Adrian.
Ta-da!
Thank you both. Thank you,
you.
Sara. Thank you, Marlon. Thank you all of us who are able to join us live here at the National Arts Club. Thank you to our virtual audience for joining us. As you've probably heard me say before, we have these talks every Tuesday through November 30th. So please join us next week for a conversation between our own Leslie Wayne and the curator of E Pluribus, Dr. Kelli Morgan. You can find the links to RSVP for those on our website, which we've got on the chat. And so we hope to see you next week. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.